Hello and welcome to Hexed Encountered. My name is Joe. Today I'm going to be doing a first look of the game Oceans of Fire, the Pacific Theater in World War II. This is from Compass Games and is designed by Rob Beyma. Just got it. I did pre-order it and I just received it actually today. So I thought I would do a quick first look video and give you guys a taste of it because I haven't seen a whole lot of video on this game yet, so I thought I might get out there and get something done so that you can see the game in case you are considering purchasing it or have already purchased it and not received it yet and are wondering what's actually in the box. Either way, let's take a look and see what we have here. So as you can see, it's a 3-inch box. It's thick and it's heavy. Here on the back, we have basically, your usual rundown. We have a look at the counters. So we do have a 34 by 43 and 3/4 inch map that's in 2 sheets. 2 counter sheets of 1.5 by 0.75 inch naval units, 4 9/16 counter sheets of ground units, air units, and markers, 1,080 counters in all. A deck of 67 event cards, 1 rule book, 1 playbook with included scenarios, 1 naval battle board, 8 player aid cards in 2 sets of 4 each for the Allies and the Japanese, 3 reinforcement cards, 3 force pool cards, 3 carrier air displays, 1 victory points and resources card that can be photocopied, 1 unit key card, 1 expanded sequence of play, and 6 10-sided dice. This is a medium-high complexity, 7 out of 10. The time scale is 6 months per turn. There are 8 turns in the game, I do know that. Map scale, variable size areas. Unit scale, ground will be divisions and brigades. Naval is 1 to 4 ships, more for subs and transports. Air is approximately 30 aircraft per air point. Players 2 or 3 players, but can accommodate solitaire or team play. The 3-player would be US, Commonwealth, and Japan. If you're wondering, that's probably obvious. But just in case. Solitaire suitability, 7 out of 10, medium. Playing time for the introductory scenario, 2 hours. Short scenarios, an evening. Campaign game, a weekend. So you might say, how can an 8-turn game take an entire weekend? Well, we'll talk about that when we get inside the box. So let's open up the box. Okay, so let's crack open the box and see what we have in here. All right. Dice, 3 white, 3 6, 10-siders. Baggies, always useful. Here are our cards. I will open the cards in a bit. Let's look into the books here. So here's our playbook. Pretty thick. The rule book I know is very thick, but this is the playbook. So let's get the rule book out. Here's the rule book, and as I mentioned, this is a thick one. You can see here it is bound, and apparently is 96 pages long. And it does have nice organization here, explaining where everything is, etc. This is a 7 out of 10 complexity game, so you would expect that the rules would be somewhat involved or detailed at least. There is a decent amount of illustration in here. Some examples, so that's good. Yeah, so you can see a lot of these pages have fairly large images on them, but there's still a lot of text here, which is not necessarily a bad thing. This is a game that covers the entirety of the Pacific War, so you would expect it to have some level of detail. You can only abstract so much before the game becomes overly simplistic, and I don't get the impression, obviously, that this one falls into that category. So we do have a lot of info in here. And yeah. So there you go. Here's your design team, play testers, etc., etc. So that is the rule book. This is the playbook. And the playbook weighs in at 68 pages. So a lot of things here. We do have advanced rules, right? Advanced rules for the first 7 pages, then optional rules for a further 7 pages. Then you have scenarios from page 15 through 28, some extended example of play, developer and designer notes, player notes for all 3 of the factions in the game, a bibliography, card appendix, glossary and index, etc., counter sheet manifest reference, and an activation cost chart. So here we have advanced rules for kamikazes and some other stuff, apparently. Leaders, air combat quality. Event cards. It's Winston Churchill. And we have on page 8, you get your optional rules that run through page 14. Here are scenarios. Solomon Island scenario, which is an introductory scenario. Then we have a midway introductory scenario, Japanese expansion covering 3 turns, Guadalcanal covering 2 turns, and the campaign game of 41 to 45 covering 8 turns. So you'll get your starting units for both sides, initial setup, markers, etc., reinforcement and replacements. The midway, you can see the midway one is somewhat more involved apparently than the Guadalcanal scenario. Then we have Japanese expansion and Guadalcanal. And here's our full Pacific War campaign scenario, extended example of play. You get a good look at the cards. As I mentioned, I will open the cards up in a bit. So yeah, this is pretty nice. And here we have our notes, player notes for each of the 3 factions, as I mentioned. Bibliography, our card index or appendix about the cards, glossary and index, which is nice. This is nice to have because you do get rule references in here as well. I always find that to be extremely useful when you need to find a rule relatively quickly. Images of the various counters. So yeah, good stuff. Very well documented game apparently. So let's get the map out. It is 2 map sheets. And I'm going to save the map and the cards for last. So let's look at our player aids, etc., and our counters first. This has a strap on it apparently. All right. Let's pull these out. So we have a force pool card for the US, a force pool card for Japan, and then 2 force pool. Well, we have a carrier display for the Commonwealth and a force pool card for the Commonwealth. I'm guessing the Japanese and American carrier cards are bigger. So here we have our map key on one side and things about the counters, the coloring. You get to explain what each of the symbology on the counters it means, what it all means apparently. We have a Commonwealth replacement, redeployment, and ship repair points. Their starting units with their locations. And then the turn for reinforcement arrivals. That's the British. The Commonwealth has kind of two pieces to it. You have the British and the Australians. They're kind of separate, but they share the same colors, basically. This would be the ground results table on one side here with some die roll modifiers and etc. I do know that all of the results in here on the CRT, basically the attacker will always lose at least something, because we're talking about combat that's on a fairly large scale, so it would be somewhat unlikely for somebody to not suffer any losses. Air combat, anti-aircraft, surrender table, and we have our air combat table here. This is the second copy of that for the other player. Then we have Japanese replacement, redeployment, and ship repair points. What we just kind of saw for the Commonwealth, this would be the Japanese. Here is our Japanese. I turned it upside down. Oh, actually, these are the naval battle boards. At first, I thought this was the carrier board, but this is the naval battle board. We have Japan over here and the Allies on this side. On the flip side of this, we have garrison rules for Australia, India, Oahu, and Japan. Chinese movement and activation restrictions. Resource list. So the resources come into play in determining how many command points the Japanese get based on, and you can see the values here. So that adds up. And the more the Japanese have, the more command points they're going to get, which allows them to do more things. So as you would expect in a Pacific War kind of thing, the Japanese are trying to expand and the Allies are trying to shut them down and ultimately, get to Japan. We have a sequence of play. There's 2 copies of this. An operation sequence and just a general sequence. So the way the game works in terms of turns, there's 8 turns. Each turn has 4 rounds. And you can see that the rounds have a detailed list of what occurs in the round. There's a specific order for the rounds as well. And then you have this interphase in between, and you do checks, and then you have skip on the last turn of scenario. So you have these things here to do as well as part of the interphase. And then when you're doing operations as part of your rounds, you follow this sequence. So this is where the detail and the 95-page rulebook comes from, is that there's a lot in here, a lot of steps to do. And that's why an 8-turn game, which is actually, if you counted the rounds as turns, you'd have 32, because there's 4 rounds per turn. So obviously that's where the length comes in, because there's a lot going on. That's the same as that. We have 2 of these as well, which would be effects. We have a naval bombing table, submarine table, strategic warfare table. So this would be U.S. submarines and B-29s, as you can read right there. Naval transport chart. Now here are the carrier displays. As I figured, these would be bigger for the U.S. and Japan. So here's the United States carrier display. Here's the Japanese carrier display. Here we have the U.S. redeployment and ship repair points like we saw for Japan and the Commonwealth. This is the U.S. version with the list of when they get everything they get. We have naval and air intercept, carrier cert. So we have 2 of these as well, as you would expect. These are player aid cards, of which there apparently are several. Naval and air interception with the die roll modifiers, carrier surface battle determination. The game uses intercepts, so that's how battles are started. Naval battles, they intercept the enemy force, and that kicks off the battle. There are different rules for like carrier forces doing things like attacking ports and airfields and stuff like that. Here's our surface naval combat table, critical hit table. We have our die rolls, die roll modifiers, etc. Naval disengagement. Command point charts. Again, there's 2 of these. So this is the command points where you can see what Japanese in the first turn for each round, they have a set number, as do the U.S. and the Commonwealth. And then it becomes variable for Japan and variable for the Commonwealth, but the U.S. is pretty much scheduled. So as you can see, they ramp up because, the U.S. obviously had its industrial might slowly ramp up over the war to, basically ridiculous levels by the time the war ended. CPs per round. And then on this side, you have the activation cost chart. So you can see here, each CP gives 12 activation points, and then you use the activation points to do things with your units. So most full-strength divisions will cost you 4 APs. So you can see a CP gives you 12. If you activate 3 full-strength divisions, that's going to basically be 1 command point. And you can see over here how many command points you have. If you're Japan, you start with 7, but then it slowly goes down, and then it becomes variable and is based on the value of the Japanese resources marker. So there is some kind of, record. I don't want to say record keeping, but just kind of maintaining a record of how many command points the Japanese and the Commonwealth will have. So you do have action point costs for all of this stuff. And then we have some notes about the map and various points on the map. And now we come to our counter sheets. So let me open this up. It is in shrink wrap. You can see the back of some of the ship counters here. And then we have some Japanese counters here. These are control markers. These are obviously divisions. Well, some brigades, some divisions. But these are control markers that you put on the map to show who controls various spots. Once I get the map out, you'll see each location has a victory point value, and so on and so forth. All right, so here are our counters. As I mentioned, here we have our control markers. These pop out really easily. They're flexing in my fingers as I'm holding it. So obviously two-sided. These fall out really easily, which is nice. In the past, I've had some issues with compass counters being difficult to pop out. These guys fall out almost on their own. So you do see we have control markers, Japan on one side and the Allies on the other. Then you have some combat units as well. You also have some Soviet stuff here too, in case the Russians get involved in the war. Here we have Marine Corps units. As far as the combat factors and stuff, when I do my playthrough, I'll go into how the rules work a little bit more, because as we saw, the rules are pretty extensive and it would take a while to describe everything. But, you can tell that the Marines are good units. They have 12-12s, when you can see some of the Japanese are 9s or 4s or 10s, etc. There are some leaders in here. You have Yamashita, Ushijima, Nagumo, Tanaka, etc. We have Vandergrift down here for the Marines, Kruger, Halsey, and Spruance, Mountbatten, and, these are U.S. units, obviously. These would be Commonwealth units. We have an armored unit, too, as well. I don't really see any U.S. armored units, but that's what you would expect. Here we have some, I think, Philippine units, perhaps. They do say Luzon on them. So that is like falling out, and I'm just going to put it to the side here. Here we have more British units or Commonwealth units. Some of these would be Australian. I'm not sure which are which, to be honest, but I know the Australians have kind of their own look to their units. Then we have a bunch of different markers for air bases, carrier strength, and so on and so forth as well. More markers, as you can see, based on the color scheme. I'd say the ones with the white that we just saw on the other sheet were Japanese. These would be American. These would be Commonwealth, and so on. Let's see. More markers. Some kamikaze stuff. Game turn, obviously. Oil reserve, strategic movement. So a lot of markers are needed, apparently, which that does not surprise me at all. And here we have the ships. So you can see some of the ships actually have 2 ships on them. And the way this works is, so you have Shokaku and Zuikaku here. And if you flip it over, you just have one of them. Apparently Shokaku gone, Zuikaku still good. Akagi and Kaga up here, etc. Hiryu, Soryu, so on and so forth, right? So... and that's true for the Japanese and the Commonwealth. Well, these, I think, are the Australians. They're kind of a grayish color. And these are the British. And these are the Americans. And you can see that it's true for the Americans as well. Now, here you have Lexington and Enterprise together, or separate, rather. And here you have them together. So that may allow you to split them up or to have them as kind of like a task force, I suppose. Hornet and Wasp, same here. Then you get kind of generic, because I think they didn't name everything because of the variation in the names. Like, we had two Hornets, for example, and so if the Hornet survives, here's the Hornet. If it survives, then you wouldn't need to have a second Hornet, so you wouldn't have to have one of these later, more advanced carriers come in and have that name as well. At least I believe that's probably why that is the case. and more ships. A lot of American ships, as you would expect. And some more Japanese over here. There are submarines as well. Right here, these are subs. There are dummy markers that are used for fog of war for the subs. You don't know, if the sub is the dummy or the sub, because you would see this side, I think, until it's revealed, and then you would know if it's the dummy or the real one. So those are the counters. So now I'm going to kind of put some of this stuff back, and we'll look at the maps and the cards. Okay, so here we have the cards, and they're actually split up. It's really one deck, essentially. So you can see here, so we have some Japanese cards, right? And so these would be Japanese events. So you have Tokyo Express, Night Combat, Axis Partners, which has something to do with Africa Corps success, results in temporary withdrawal of one British. So So those are the Japanese, and you can see there's a handful of those. And then we have the British. And so they have things like the Chindits, the Royal Navy, Spitfires, Bridge over the River Kwai. That's a nice touch. I like that. Home Defense, Mountbatten, Churchill, etc. Then we have the Americans, and we have Magic, Turkey Shoot, Soviet Declaration of War, Atomic Bomb, MacArthur, IJA, IJN Strife. There was definitely a rivalry between the Imperial Japanese Army and the Imperial Japanese Navy. Hawaii on Alert, Heavy Bombers, Stilwell, Doolittle, Atlantic Transfer, and Silent Service. So it feels like maybe there's more American cards than the other ones, maybe. Actually, Japan and America look pretty close. So we do have these cards here for the card summary that kind of explains what they do. So when you use them, on the back you have types, how you gain cards, swapping cards. There's 3 copies, I'm assuming one for all 3 possible players. So that is that. Now the rest of these cards, Rain Squall, Flanking Maneuver, Enemy Surprise, these are cards that aren't specific to any one faction because they don't have flags on them. But you use these, obviously, as a player to impact things you're doing. So this would be, I would assume, something like a card-assisted type of thing. This is not a card-driven game. So that is the look at the cards, and now we'll take a look at the maps. Okay, so here you can see the entirety of the map, and sorry, I had to kind of go handheld here because this thing is just so large that I would not be able to get it in one shot, so you're going to get to look at it from, from a height, basically. It is enormous, as I said. So, well, maybe not enormous. There are obviously bigger wargame maps, but this is a fairly large map, as you can see. And there is some overlap, so you can kind of, tack them together. I have not obviously laid a plexiglass on it to flatten it out or anything like that, which I would when I'm playing, and I will when I'm playing. But this gives you a look at the map, which stretches from Hawaii in the east all the way over to India and basically India, China, etc. on the west over to the left here. Okay, so I've kind of zoomed in a little bit more so get a better look at the map up close to see what kind of the areas look like. So here you have Tarawa, which gives you how many points it's worth, who controls it at start, and the strength of the garrison. So this is obviously a pretty weak garrison, 0-0. It is a Commonwealth. And then, over here, obviously you have Guadalcanal, Bougainville, Rabaul, New Georgia. Up north and in that direction, you have the Marianas. So you'd have Guam and Saipan, Truk. Over here, let me slide this down some. We have Midway, we have Oahu, and you can see the strength of the what it can base, I think. And again, I haven't read all the rules yet, but I think this one can hold 4 divisions and 12 air points. And it has a 12 port as well, which is real. or has a port, and it's worth 12 victory points. Obviously, that's a very important location, of course. For comparison, Tokyo has the same port with 12 for Tokyo as well, which is on the other side of the map, obviously. So you can, the quote unquote important areas of the war are pretty easy to identify. Things like Iwo Jima, and like I said, the Marianas, Saipan, and Guam, so on. Rabaul is worth 6, so that's a big one as well. So that's kind of the and this here up here is the U.S. box right here. This is where U.S. Mainland forces are. Basically, it's kind of like an infinity symbol there. But mainland forces go in here, and then it costs them 1 extra movement point to leave this box because they have to transit out to the Pacific, of course. So that is the that'll do it, I guess, for this first look at Oceans of Fire from Compass Games, designed by Rob Beyma. And this is obviously just come out of the development pipeline and is ready for purchase and is being shipped to those who pre-ordered it. And it can be ordered from the Compass website as well. If you wish to leave a comment or have a question or whatever, I will do my best to reply in a timely fashion. And so again, thanks for watching. My name's Joe. This is Hexed Encountered, and until next time, happy gaming.